I did want to talk about the San Diego Padres in a sense of a lot of fans this offseason were worried about players leaving. A lot of fans during the offseason were worried about players leaving. Wanted to bring back David Peralta. He ends up going to Seattle. Donovan Solano. He ends up going to Seattle. Wanted to bring back David Peralta. He's still technically a free agent. Jerickson Profar obviously was part of that conversation. Some of the players. Tanner Scott signs with the Dodgers. I mean, key players to a 2024 team that was very successful and just came up a little bit short. So, how do you fill those voids? Well, sometimes you do it via free agency, and sometimes there's just players on the team that just step up. I mean, you're going to have good years out of some guys, and you're going to have some bad years out of some guys. But I think there's enough on this team to fill some of the voids that left in free agency or match what some of the players did last season. And we're going to call it fill in the blank. And to me, I'm going to start off with some of the players that were role guys last year. You know, guys that came in and were signed to very small deals and filled out the roster, put veterans on the bench. And some of them signed late, too, because they were waiting for other moves to be made throughout baseball. I'm talking, of course, about David Peralta and Donovan Solano. The 2025 San Diego Padres are going to have one of each. This year's David Peralta is Jason Heyward. I mean, David Peralta the last couple of years had been okay. I think he's one of those players that, and when the Padres picked him up, I thought he was one of those guys, man, I wish I had this guy 3 or 4 years ago. Because David Peralta in the Diamondbacks was a perennial player. I mean, he used to destroy the Padres, and he did not have the success in Los Angeles. Bounces around a little bit after that, and then found a home with the Padres and did very well. He was that player that came in with the right attitude of, look, I'm trying to win a World Series. I'm up there in age. I'll help out in any way I can. Whatever I can do to help the team win is what I want to do. And that was David Peralta last year for the Padres. In 2023, with the Dodgers, was okay. Wasn't the best, but was okay. At a 0.6 WAR. David Peralta coming off the bench was a good player. To me, I think that's Jason Heyward. Jason Heyward's in a very similar position. Jason Heyward was a great player with Atlanta when he came up. He ended up going to play for the Cubs and won a World Series after a small stint in St. Louis when he was traded to St. Louis. Put up some really big numbers in his age 20 to 25 season in Atlanta and St. Louis. He was at 6.4 WAR, 5.5 WAR, 3.6 WAR, 5.5, 6.9. Had some decent years in Chicago, but really his best was right after they won a World Series. And then again in 2019. And after that, it's been under 2. But David Peralta had an under 1 WAR as well. Didn't play a lot of games. But I think Jason Heyward had very similar numbers in Los Angeles in 2023 as David Peralta did in Los Angeles the year prior to joining the Padres. Last year didn't be as good. It wasn't as good for Jason Heyward. Same thing. I think he could bounce back as a role player and be this year's David Peralta. This year's Donovan Solano. Donovan Solano, another one of those. It was a versatile player for the Padres. Guy that could play in a lot of different infield positions. Ended up hitting his way into the starting lineup. I mean, he was a guy you had to play. You had to play this guy. He's always hit for a high average everywhere he went. Not the biggest WAR guy on the stat sheet. Not a huge slug guy, but good defensively. Could play anywhere in the infield and hit for a high average. That's Jose Iglesias. That's almost exactly Jose Iglesias. Jose Iglesias, who was actually part of the Padres organization before he joined the Mets, was that player. A .337 batting average a year ago with the New York Mets. If you look at his hitting all the way through his career, with Detroit, with Boston, with Colorado, with the Angels, he hit over 250 every single year. The only exception was when he was 22 years old in 2012, when he only played in 25 games. But in every year he played in enough games to qualify, the guy's hitting over 250. He could play anywhere in the infield. High average guy, good defender. He will be this year's Donovan Solano. This year's Jerickson Profar, from a standpoint of bringing somebody in on a small deal with low expectations, I think you could talk about maybe a pitching side Kyle Hart, but I want to view it as a veteran that is still in his good years, who does not have a lot of expectations going into 2025, that has had this experience in the past, that has done well in the past, even has done well in a Padres uniform in the past, that's going to make a major impact. I don't necessarily know if he makes an all-star game, but I think this year's Jerickson Profar is going to be Xander Bogaerts. We talked about him earlier on the show, about the success that he had in that first year, about all the differences that he made this offseason after a rough season last year where he was banged up. He's healthy now. He's comfortable in San Diego now after a couple of years. He knows what position he's going to play. Doesn't have a lot of hype right now coming from the fans. He's on the team, obviously, because he has a high contract and you can't get rid of him. But I think Xander Bogaerts is this year's Jerickson Profar. And if he is, I think the Padres are going to be in really good